A few months ago I purchased myself an upgraded graphics card, and this was in the form of the RTX 2060. So in today's video we're going to be having a look at how the RTX 2060 the RTX 2060 has a base clock of 1365 MHz and a boost clock of 1680 MHz. The memory clock is at 1750 MHz, 14 gigabits per second effective, and it has a memory size of 6 gigabytes. And this 6 gigabytes of memory is GDDR6 on a 192-bit bus. So we have some decent looking specs here, and some people have compared the performance similar to a 1080. We're going to see in today's test how similar it actually is. And if somebody wanted to know what the architecture of the RTX 2060 is, it is the Turing architecture on the 12nm process. Now, for today's testing, we have the Asus ROG Strix, which stands for Republic of Gamers, if anyone was wondering. And as you can see on the screen now, it actually has two separate BIOSes, which is quite interesting. So one is Q mode and one is P mode. Q mode is quiet mode and P is performance mode. Today we're going to be using quiet mode because we want to really see what the performance of the RTX 2060 is on a whole, so everybody gets a general idea of what a 2060 can perform like. But in another video I'm going to be trying out this P mode and seeing if it actually makes a difference and seeing how far we can push this specific variant of the card. However, in today's testing we're going to be just going around all of the cards. I haven't ran any overclocks for them, so I have to burn out. I haven't ran fans at full or anything like that. It has been up to temperature to give it the most even numbers that we can get, just so people aren't too disappointed if you buy a lower end RTX 2060. So without further ado, I'll put it back into the case of my computer and started the benchmarks. So first off, we tried a city builder in City Skylines. We had the settings at the absolute maximum and at 1080p, and we saw ourselves an average frame rate of 42.8 FPS, a minimum frame rate of 19.3 FPS, a maximum frame rate of 55.9 FPS, a 1% low of 13 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 10 FPS. Now everybody knows City Skylines is not the best optimised in the world, which is quite strange for a city builder, but it has always been that way when people have tried to run it. So that's why we're getting slightly lower than expected in this game. Also, this is quite a large city, you can see on screen now. I was guessing in the earlier game where you've got a smaller sort of city, you'd expect those figures to be a lot higher, but this is the worst case scenario really. You've got the biggest city, well, one of the biggest cities, and this is what you're expecting to see. So next up we tried GTA 5. I know that it's quite old now, but a lot of people still play it, so I still leave it in the benchmarks. We ran this also at the absolute maximum settings, 1080p, with an average frame rate of 94.2 FPS, a minimum frame rate of 47.5 FPS, a maximum frame rate of 268.9 FPS, a 1% low of 39.1 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 10.1 FPS. Now, let me talk about those figures a little bit. So the maximum frame rate of 268.9, that was mainly just in loading screens and when nothing was going on, so that's why that's there. Just to make you everybody aware of that. And the other lows, I didn't really notice them. I didn't notice any stuttering throughout the benchmark. I did run it multiple times, and yeah, there wasn't much stuttering going on really, so I'm guessing the 0.1s and 1% lows aren't going to be that noticeable when you're playing in gameplay. I think they're mostly happening when the game's loading, so I wouldn't look too much into that. Next up we tried quite a newer game really, in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This was also run at the absolute maximum settings. We got an average frame rate of 103 FPS, a minimum frame rate of 22.5 FPS, a maximum frame rate of 145.3 FPS, a 1% low of 60.2 FPS, and a 0.1% low frame rate of 12.9 FPS. Now, as this is an EA game, it's not greatly optimised, so that's where those drops were. You could notice them. It seemed to be mainly at the start of the game. Must have been some sort of whatever it was loading in, whatever assets were being loaded in. As soon as we got past the first couple of cutscenes, those seemed to smooth out completely, and it was completely playable throughout, but it was a lot more playable after that. So I'm not sure what that's all about. Maybe if you want to drop the settings a little bit to just high or something like that, you wouldn't see that. But if you can deal with it for the early game, it looks like it doesn't continue, but I'd have to do a bit more testing to find that out. Next up, we tried something a little bit older in Forza Motorsport 7. I don't have Forza Motorsport yet. I will be getting it soon, so that'll be added and swapped around. But for now, Forza Motorsport 7, this was run at its own dynamic sort of settings. So Forza Motorsport 7 has this weird system where it dynamically optimises the game as it's running. I'm not 100% sure how it works, so I can't explain it, but that's what I left it at because that's what it wanted to do. It's not actually setting a preset, it just changes in real time. Anyway, in the benchmark we've seen an average of 64.1 FPS, a minimum frame rate of 0.2 FPS, a maximum frame rate of 86.4 FPS, a 1% low of 0.2 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 0.2 FPS. Now, those 0.2s are all to do with the loading screens. For some reason, it went straight down to nothing at loading screens. Compared to some games, it's normally capped at something, but that's what it got. So I really wouldn't look too much into that. You're getting 64.1 FPS, which is perfect for this game, really. I'd like to be a bit higher, but it's an Xbox title, really, and it's sort of ported over in a weird way to PC. I will take it any day, and it was completely playable in my mind. Now to the newest Forza game in Forza Horizon 5. We ran this at the absolute maximum settings again at 1080p, and we got an average of 181.8 FPS, a minimum frame rate of 0.1 FPS, a maximum frame rate of 501.3 FPS, a 1% low of 0.1 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 0.1 FPS. Same applies with those 0.1 FPSs. Those were in loading screens. For some reason, it could just went completely down to nothing. In some loading screens, the maximum that you can see was actually in the loading screen to get into the game. So, I don't know, different loading screens have different FPS in Forza for some reason. But yeah, take the average, really, 181 FPS. And I didn't see it dip. It was very, very stable. And I didn't notice any stutters in gameplay at all. Now, we tried 3D Marks tests, and this wouldn't be a true RTX test if we didn't try out some ray tracing. Now, at the moment, I don't have any ray tracing games or games that I can set up as compatible for ray tracing, so we went with the Port Royal test on 3D Mark, where we got a graphics test of 17 FPS and a score on Port Royal of 3,683. The average for this sort of card is 4,195 and the best is 4,906. Now, as you know, this was the entry card for ray tracing when it came out. So obviously we weren't expecting to see amazing performance or playable performance at ray tracing. However, I know with games like Minecraft and stuff like that, you will probably be able to get a fairly decent ray tracing experience if you tweak the settings a bit. So to cap things off, we have gone with the good old Time Spy, which is a DirectX 12 test, which we have run for many years now. We got a combined score of 8,029. This is paired with my Ryzen 7 3700X, so this should give the RTX 2060 plenty of room to breathe. And the graphics score was 7,847. So really decent performance if you are playing any games that are DirectX 12 and aren't ray tracing turned on. So I guess it comes down to the price. Now these are going online for around about 140 to 150 pounds used, probably a little bit cheap if you look elsewhere, and it also depends on the variant, but that is the sort of price you'd be looking at to get yourself into one of these. And and the performance is really decent as we've seen today. It is probably comparable to a GTX 1080. You do have ray tracing there, which in Forza Horizon 5 works fine, and in other games it probably won't. Really, if you want to play ray tracing, this probably isn't the card for you because this was the entry level. But if you want to just try ray tracing it for the first time, this is definitely a perfect card to go for, especially at the price point it's at. Now you're probably wondering, because I haven't mentioned it for this video, how much I got this RTX 2660 for and where I got it from. So this RTX 2060 I actually purchased through Amazon's warehouse, which if you didn't know was where Amazon sell their returns basically. And I picked this up for £147 back in February. It was still in the box with all the original stuff. It hadn't even been opened from the anti-static bag inside. The box had been opened, but that was about it. So I got really lucky with this. It just came up at the right time and I had to just go for it to upgrade from my 1060 6GB. So it was perfect. But have a look out for deals like that on Amazon. This is definitely a very good card to go for at the moment. It is starting probably to become a bit of a budget king. So we will see where it goes in the future. If you would like to buy yourself one of these cards from Amazon, you can use our affiliate link down in the description down below. The channel gets a little bit of a kickback on there, which helps us produce more videos just like this. If you've liked this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share the video if you can. It'd be much appreciated. And also leave any comments for any questions or